again. It's been a long time since I put out some videos showing you the progress I've been making on my 67 Camaro. Last time I did a video, I think I've shown you installing the 12-volt rear axle, the tubular suspension. I think I did a video showing you how I was compressing the front springs. I just talked in general about the progress I've been making on the body. That was back in the spring. I think, in fact, it was right when our COVID-19 pandemic had started. And anyway, it's still in progress. It's now the fall. It's November. And we've been doing a lot, but once again, I was down for the summer for a while, so I didn't get that much progress. But one of the things I did was shop for an engine. I toyed with the idea of putting an LS in it, and then I just realized, like, I'm just not prepared or skilled enough to do all the modifications. So I decided on buying a remanufactured engine, a blueprint engine. It's a Chevy small block, 355 cubic inches with about 390 horsepower, and I'm pretty satisfied with it. Obviously, I haven't run it yet or used it, but it came with aluminum heads, their own custom performance heads. As you can see, it's mated to a TKO, Tremec TKO 5-speed, and I put a McLeod clutch, installed a McLeod clutch in it. It has a Summit flywheel, which I was pretty pleased. Summit doesn't advertise that the flywheel is made in the U.S., but it was made in the U.S., and put a 10.5-inch flywheel, Tremec TKO 5-speed. They say that it'll fit fine without having to do any modifications to the tunnel or the floor pan, and I'll also be able to use my factory console, because this car came with the factory console, which I have. The McLeod clutch, I went up one step instead of their base clutch. They suggested, because of my horsepower is close to 400 horsepower, to use their Super Street Pro, which has one half of it's organic and one half is bronze metallic material. So that's the McLeod clutch that I put in. So once again, I have no idea how the performance is. These are just things I went shopping around with and I bought. So anyway, hopefully everything goes well. We'll be installing this really soon. I'm waiting for my headers to come, because I know that shoehorning the headers in when it's pretty tight with the manual trans and the power steering box, which I'm going to talk to you in a moment about, I figured, let me get my headers so that while we have the cherry picker, if we have to pick the engine up to shoehorn the headers in, we can. I settled for Doug Thorley Tri-Wise. They're a long style, but they have a lot of power and more torque in the low range, which is something that I like. They say, I called up Doug Thorley, and they said that the Tri-Wise are going to fit fine. They say that they'll work with my modified heads. You know, it's not a factory head. They said that it'll fit with using the Z-bar from the clutch, so I don't have to have a hydraulic clutch. The headers will fit with also the power steering, because I added I bought a CPP 500 series power steering box. In fact, come on over, I'll show you that. I'll talk to you about it for a moment. When shopping for headers, it seems every manufacturer says that their headers will not fit with a close ratio Saginaw 825 steering box. Well, what is a Saginaw 825 steering box? I mean, I went and bought from CPP their 500 series. They couldn't really tell me if it was or not. I went on the internet searching, and I guess you and me and everybody else is confused as far as what the heck really is the close ratio steering box. How do you identify it? Well, I called Doug Thorley, and they said basically just turn your steering wheel lock to lock, and if it's 2.5 rotations, that's a close ratio. But I turned mine, and mine is 3.75 to 1, so I don't have a close ratio steering box. So that's how I determined that I don't have the 825 close ratio steering box. One of the things that was a concern with me is my Z-bar clutch for manual transmission, and the header, folks, Doug Thorley says that it will fit with this. As you can see, I realize it's not installed because I'm rebuilding it right now, the Z-bar. But the Z-bar would go in right about here, and they said that it's going to work out fine with their headers, so that's a good thing. And also, interesting how close the Z-bar comes to my steering shaft, the rag joint on the steering shaft. But there's clearance in there. I know I'm only holding it up, but I'm pretty confident that that's going to fit also. So those are some concerns I had with that motor and getting headers to fit. And I believe that the tri-Ys are going to fit fine, and that's an important thing. Let's go back to the fuel lines, because I told you earlier that I was going to demonstrate how to cut and fit a PTFE fitting. PTFE is the fuel line. It's a braided steel line with stainless steel line with a plastic inner lining, and that's what's resistant to any corrosion from ethanol in your fuel. Like I said, I don't know if I showed you that. Let me just go get it. CPP came with the kit, came with all this rubber hose, and there was no way I was going to install rubber hose under my car. I mean, it's not resistant to any road hazards, and also it's my understanding that it could eventually deteriorate from ethanol that's in fuel. So that's why I did my research and bought from Summit it's 6AN, the 6AN, which is 3/8 fuel line. And those are the fittings that came with the fuel pump, so that's why I stuck with a 6. And I don't have a super high horsepower motor, so I don't have to upgrade the inner diameter of my fuel hose any more than that. The 6AN will be good enough. And you can see the plastic lining inside there. So I'm going to demonstrate to you how to fit one on. I know there's other videos, people doing other videos, and I found it very helpful. And I found out that after watching all the videos, like, hey, this isn't that difficult. So I'm going to demonstrate putting a PTFE fitting on. How do I know this is a PTFE fuel fitting? Because if you take it apart, there'll be a little ferrule in there. I'll just show you that right there. PTFE fuel fittings have this little ferrule that has to get in there, and that's what I'm going to show you how to do. So I'm going to get doing it right now. Before we forget, I know I jump around a lot, just take a quick peek. A buddy of mine rebuilt my steering column, and we'll take a closer look at that after I'm through with this demonstration. Okay, welcome to Underneath My 67 Camaro. I want to take a little time and talk to you about the fuel system that I have. I bought a classic performance parts EFI ready fuel tank, brand new fuel tank. It has an electric fuel pump. It came with rubber fuel lines, but I replaced them with braided PTFE fuel lines, which are much more resistant to corrosion from the ethanol, and also because it's resistant to any rocks and chips. This is the output from the electric pump. It routes up to my 10 micron Summit fuel filter, which then heads over to the LS Corvette style fuel filter regulator combo unit. The input is the larger tube on the outside. There's an output is over here, which would head to the front of the car, and then there's a return fitting that returns fuel back to the fuel tank, which goes right there. This is the setup that I put. I went and did some research. I couldn't find anybody telling you how to route the fuel line, so I found one person showed a picture with the regulator over here on the frame rail, so I copied that, and then I just decided to put the fuel filter up there and mount the lines like you see. So I think I did a pretty good job. This is my rubber fuel vent hose. which there's a little problem here that the fuel vent hose must be higher than the fuel inlet in the back of the gas tank where you fill the tank. The highest point under the car is right here, but that's not high enough. That's not higher than the fuel filler pipe. I could drill a hole and put the vent up inside the passenger compartment, but that'd be dangerous. You should never do that. You would never vent your gas tank inside your car at all, even in the trunk. So come on outside and I'll show you where I routed this fuel line. Welcome to the tail panel fuel filler pipe for a 67, 68 Camaro. You can see it's quite high in reference to the rest of the gas tank. On a 69, your filler pipe would be down here by the license plate. So the problem is you have to route the gas tank vent higher than this point. Now CPP gave me this combo vent and check valve. You can see there's a check valve in there. It can only be installed in a vertical position. So that was a problem. Where could I mount it in a vertical position higher than this point? What happened is I called Tanks Incorporated, who made the tank, and they pointed out that I would have to use a different combination here. I got these documents here to show you that originally, using the check valve, it would have to be placed higher than the filler pipe, and you can't flip it over. But if you bought their VVRIL check valve combination, you can flip it upside down and install in line a check valve like that. It's a rollover valve, so that's what I did. Unfortunately, I couldn't use the combo valve that came with the tank that CPP sold me. I had to buy the inline check valve here, and you can see I route the vent line comes up. I had to drill a hole in the floor, trunk pan, come up. It's now higher. At this point, the rubber vent hose is higher than my filler pipe, which is under here, and then it goes back down. You take a look, it goes back down through another hole I drilled in my trunk pan, and then the vent is over here. It's outside of the car. Then it's outside of the car, and it is a vent only. There's not a check valve in here. That's why I could not use the one that I had in my hand. And you can see the vent is vented outside safely. If the car was to roll over, the check valve would stop it. If they were to overfill the fuel tank, air would come up here, and liquid fuel would start pouring out of the back of the filler pipe and not out of the vent, which would not put any gas inside the car anyway. So I felt that was a really good solution for venting my EFI fuel tank. And here's some documentation that came with the fuel tank. As they pointed out, it must be higher than the fuel filler pipe, but where higher? There's no place to put this, so I couldn't use it. I had to spend the extra money and buy the other kit from Tanks Incorporated. Okay. I have my braided steel PTFE fuel line. First thing you have to do is determine where you're going to cut it. So I wrapped it with some masking tape, and I marked it with a marker. I'm only cutting off an inch just as a demonstration. Okay, I do need this full length, which will eventually go from my fuel pressure regulator to my EFI system, which I am planning on putting a Holley EFI in the future. And I bit the bullet and bought these really nice cutters from Summit. I have tried using a hacksaw. I have tried using a thin wheel grinder, and I was never pleased with the results. Some guys out on the internet swear by it, that they work great using a hacksaw, but I gave up. I went and bought from Summit the shears, and they work great. So let me just give it a nice slice here. I know, I marked it on the wrong side there, but there we go. Easy, line it up, and let's see, just one little fiber. Let me just cut that. There we go. So cut fairly clean. It does crush it a little bit, so I just take a pair of pliers and just work it a little bit. While it's still nice and closed up, take your fitting, and I've done this before. I've forgotten about installing this, But install this part of the fitting right now before you forget, okay? Because it's time to start spreading this out so the ferrule goes in here like this, and then we lubricate and insert this part of the fitting. So make sure you have a clean surface where you place your fuel parts. And now I use my favorite small little screwdriver. Got to take off the tape. This occurred to me. Let me do that right now. And then I work the braid out. Be careful, the little fibers of your stainless steel braided hose will get in your skin and poke you, so be careful about that. Take your time. There we go. Remove all traces of your masking tape. And now, first I'm going to take just a round end of the needle nose pliers and just work that, open up the PTFE liner. Is that nice and round? Then I take the small screwdriver and just slowly work the braid away a little bit, because that's where we have to make room for the brass ferrule. Okay, I think I've done enough there. You don't have to get too crazy with it. Okay, the brass ferrule has a tiny little edge, little ridge. In fact, I'll just use the screwdriver to highlight that. The screwdriver right now is rubbing against the ridge in there, and that's where the PTFE liner has to butt up against. Make sure you don't get any residue in there or anything. And now, there we go, that wasn't too difficult. There, I just inserted the brass ferrule right up against the edge of the plastic PTFE. And now it's time to insert the fitting in, but they recommend you lubricate it. And once again, I bit the bullet and bought Earl's Racing Products Assembly Lube, designed specifically for use with synthetic rubber hose and fuel lines. So I know I don't need a lot of it, but they recommended it, so I wanted to do a good job. So just a drop, smear it around the fitting, and then insert into the PTFE. And I haven't done this in a while. Make sure you don't crush, okay? So I actually pulled it out on purpose, because once I caught the PTFE and collapsed the PTFE and crushed it, and you don't want to do that. So take my time. I got the lube on there. Make sure it's in. And it's almost in. I'm going to put it in the vise so that I don't have to fight with it so much. So they do make special aluminum jaw vices specifically for these aluminum fittings. I'm just going to gently close it up and just snug it. And now I can put a little more pressure forward. It was a lot easier last time I did this. Let me see. You know what? I think the last time I did this, I put the fuel line here and I tapped in the... Hey, do you mind holding that? Thanks. Let me try this. There's always little tricks. Yep, that worked a lot easier. So I held the fuel line in and I just tapped the fitting in place. And now you remember that coupling that I slid in? Okay, that goes over. Now you can see that there's some braid sticking out. Then I'm just going to take my fingers. You could use a piece of wood or a tool just to push it in place. But you just get that over it. And now I'll put this back in the vise. And just gently till I could just get the thread started. You don't want to force anything. And I know they make special aluminum wrenches, but there we go. Yep. And you just take your time. If something doesn't feel right, stop, take it apart, and inspect. You might have something in the way. Thanks, Ed. Yeah, it's the hose, the actual full hose actually has to get rotated around in this case. Or I could now reverse things, put this in the vise, and turn the other fitting. So there's there we go. And just snug it up. Don't kill it. Don't over torque anything. It's just aluminum fittings. And as you know, the PTFE fittings are not cheap. You don't want to ruin them. So there we go. Nice and snug. And that's about it. A little more. I'm done. That came out good. There you go. PTFE fuel line, braided fuel line on the fitting. As we were working on the body and chassis, we started working on some of the sub-assemblies. One of the things I did, that I don't really have to be able to show you, but I took apart the factory brake pedal and clutch pedal assembly and took everything apart, cleaned it, repainted everything, and the clutch pedal and brake pedal are all installed now. And we had the steering column, which was a mess. So my buddy Ed here took everything apart and lubricated, repainted, reassembled everything. And a few things that we have to point out is, one is, yes, we had the factory service manual, which was definitely helpful, but also there are some great YouTube videos Ed found for people showing how to service it, especially if you had the tilt steering wheel, right?
Yeah, most of the instructional videos were about the cars with tilt steering wheels. This is a straight steering wheel without a shift mechanism. This is just for a floor shifter, or didn't have any gears inside here. Didn't have any gears on any linkage on the bottom for the shifter. Just straight through. So that's pretty simple. But when you take it apart, it's a little confusing on how to reassemble inside this shaft, where there's a little C-clip, a wave washer, and a flat washer that puts pressure down on the internal parts of the steering column that are below the turn signal switch, down inside here. And it's not very well explained in the manual, so I looked on YouTube to try to find an answer, a solution to that mechanism. I couldn't find anybody that had done that. There was dozens of people talking about the tilt column, and there is a special puller on the tilt column that you need to pull a pressure disc inside here, which we bought this special puller, but it didn't work on this application because it didn't have anything to press on. So Charlie did make an adapter so that we could screw it on. The adapter that came with this didn't fit on the steering shaft, so
it's a half-inch. This has a half-inch 20 thread. The kit came with a 9/16 and a nut and another. It was a 9/16, 18, and a metric 14 millimeter, which was. It even said it. The kit said it was really for newer models, and I realized, like, I'm not going to go crazy trying to return it and find the right coast. It's really, you called it a puller. Is it really a compressor?
It's it presses down on a pressure plate that allows you to slide a little circle clip. It's not an actual C-clip, but it's a piece of wire that goes in a groove on the steering shaft. I'll pull this piece off of here so you can look down the side there.
Want some light on it?
Down, actually that C-clip is right in here that I was talking about. It fits underneath the...
We can see it here.
Yeah, you see that?
Yep.
Well, that's under spring pressure. So it took 3 people to reassemble that. We had one person holding the steering shaft two people pressing down on both sides of this wave washer and spring and pushing down on the spring pressure that's underneath the whole steering column to allow that little C-clip to fit in a groove that's in it. So actually, we got the C-clip to mount on the thicker part of the shaft and press it down with a screwdriver until it snapped into the groove.
So in the
and
end, we
worked-
didn't
worked
use
its way
this, yeah.
around. So we didn't need that
But we
pressing.
had it,
We didn't need that pressing tool.
and
So-
I made the adapter on a lathe that has a 1/2-inch thread instead, but we didn't, in the end, we didn't use
It
it.
didn't, yeah, we couldn't, there was no room to fit that in there, so it was done manually by two people pressing down on the washer, the wave washer, and the spring that's underneath here, because the spring's down inside the steering shaft. So once that's in place, it holds the whole collar and the housing for the steering wheel and for the turn signal switch. And one important thing is every time you take this apart, whether you need it or not, there's the little return springs that are mounted on the plastic turn signal switch. Those return springs,
Is that this in the, right there in the diagram?
well, this is that's the C-clip, the wave washer and the flat washer.
Okay, sorry to interrupt. Oh,
That's
here
all
it
right.
is here. Is this it there?
No, that's,
Those
well,
three
that's
springs?
that's the part that fits on the bottom of this whole unit. I should have taken a picture of it before we put it together. It was pretty tough. The instructions don't tell you how to do it. I had to disassemble everything, and there's a big plate where the three screws and springs that hold the whole internal turn signal mechanism in place, and they mount to a flat steel-shaped bracket, for lack of other words. It has three screws and three springs that hold this in place. That fits down on the shaft, and it fits over. If I can show maybe a picture in the book, I might have a picture of that. No, it doesn't. There's an oddly shaped bracket. If you can zoom in on that, I don't know if that. So this little bracket down here.
Yeah, it shows pretty good.
Okay, yeah, well, that mounts on the bottom of this whole mechanism that fits in here. To get that to line up, I had to take everything apart and just lay it in place and then mark it with a marker just to show where it fits, so that when I assemble everything, I could slide it down in place, and you turn that a quarter, like an eighth of a turn to the right, and then you tighten the screws, and that holds everything in place, and it locks this mechanism all in place. It's a little tricky. So anyway, I started to say, those little the return springs are what returns when you turn the steering wheel. There's a cam on, where's that cam? There's a little, I thought it was on here, but it's not. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Here, it's on the bottom of this little spring cam. Those little ears are what return the turn signal after you make a turn. It moves in, it slips by in one direction as you're turning the wheel, and when you return, presses on it, and that returns the turn signal switch. So whenever you take that apart, these things rust out pretty easily. So it makes a lot of sense. You can buy that as a kit from Help when you go to an auto parts store. Here's one of the rusty ones. One was completely disintegrated. So it's a good idea to replace it. So it's a good idea. And then in reassembling this, we use some dielectric lubricant on the bottom of this plastic plate. There's switches down there and contacts, and we lubricated it well, locked it all together, and then you have your contact that works on the bottom of your signal canceling switch. That brings your contact up through this little button and contact that goes up to the steering wheel, and to the horn mechanism. And when you press the horn down, all these little springs and contacts go down into the steering wheel through the cabling that comes out of this whole mechanism. Once you take it apart, there's little clips that you have to replace, put the clips back on to protect the wiring. And you have brackets, mounting brackets that fit on here that go into underneath the dashboard. So just mark everything, clean it, and sand it, clean it, paint it. We've done everything. Everything looks very nice and original.
Came out good, Ed. I want to thank you big time, because that was a very tedious, painstaking process, but definitely necessary. Regarding any new parts I had to buy, Ed already mentioned the turn signal springs. There's a upper bearing right here. It was in fine shape. I didn't bother replacing that, but I did have to replace down here at the lower end of the steering column. There was the original bearing was an old ball bearing that disintegrated years ago. I remember when I first owned the car finding ball bearings on the floor. So this older bearing assembly had fallen apart years ago. Heartbeat City is a Camaro specialty website, and I was able to buy the replacement and upgraded. They say that the upgraded bearing assembly goes to a 69 Camaro, and it fit great. And the only other thing is the rubber gaskets that we replaced these. So I had to buy the gasket, the upper assembly, the lower bearing, and the springs.
Clip.
Yeah, and the clip came with it. So
And there's an adjustment on this. This
The
bushing
plastic,
down here,
yeah.
this bushing down here presses up and puts pressure on the whole steering shaft. Like it's adjusted with maybe a tool, but we'd probably use a spanner on there of some type to tighten that up a little bit and put pressure on the whole bearing mechanism so it locks it and makes it
it's plastic. The factory says that you're supposed to melt the upper ring onto the shaft. And I don't want to mess around with the threads. If Ed, you got it tightened just the way you want it.
I'm going to tighten up a little bit more. I loosened
Yeah.
it to give myself some play so I can get that clip on over here.
We'll just leave, once you adjust it, we'll leave it. I don't feel like melting the threads. Because it came apart for us. If they had melted it in a serious manner back at the factory, we would have never been able to take it apart to service it. So we just leave things alone. So great job, Ed. Thank you very much. And next video, we'll have the motor in with this new tri-wide headers. So looking forward to that. Motor and trans in place. And the steering column sadly can't go in until we start painting it. So thanks very much for watching our videos, and take care and stay safe and healthy.